The birth of a baby can start a variety of powerful emotions, from excitement and joy to fear and anxiety, but it can also result in something you might not expect: depression. In today's episode, I'll discuss postpartum issues with Jessica Jocelyn, mother and author of 4 poetry books. Her poetry can be described as raw and real, but serves as a reminder to her readers that they're not alone. I'll be reading some of her poems on pregnancy and motherhood from her book, Evermore. I'm Jess Faulkner, and this is Just Jess. The title of today's episode is Postpartum Problems, Poetry, and a Birthing Story, with Jessica Jocelyn. This episode contains topics that may be difficult to discuss. Listeners be advised. My beautiful child, the wars of your mother will not be yours to bear. You will never witness the storms within my soul or meet the demons that inhabit it. You will be sheltered under my branches that I have grown just for you, a brand new family tree with all the rut cut out. You will never be crushed by the weight that I carry. You will be carefree, just as a child should be. So time for some updates. I'd say the launch of this podcast has been extremely successful, with over 800 listeners. Thank you for your support. Thank you for listening. I really hope I can continue to bring you the content that is helpful and that you enjoy listening to. Thank you. Health update. We're monitoring my spleen because it's enlarged, but I don't have any blood clots from my ribs down, so that's good news. Here's a strange but exciting life update for me. I finally did karaoke. I've never done karaoke before. I've been to plenty of karaoke bars, but I've never actually done karaoke. So on Friday nights, my husband Josh and I went on a date night. We went to a place called J. O'Grady's, and they do karaoke after hours. So I decided to do Shoop by Salt and Peppa, because that's a song I know inside and out. And I think it was really great. I had a lot of fun. I don't know what I was so nervous about, and now I won't be nervous next time to do karaoke because now I know it's not a big deal and nobody's actually paying attention to me. I think that's all I have for updates. Let's get into the episode.
It was a shock because you know that it's going to be hard. You're very well aware that it's going to be hard, but you just don't actually fully get it until you are deep in it.
Today, I'm joined by Jessica Jocelyn. Jessica, could you tell me a bit more about yourself?
I'm Jessica, born and raised in California, but I've lived all over the United States. I've been a mother coming up on 14 years, and I have been publishing poetry books for the past 3 years.
Tell me a bit about your beautiful family.
We now have 3 kids, ages 13, 8, and 3.
Will you tell me a bit about your journey through depression?
So I'm definitely no stranger to depression. I would deal with it off and on through my adolescence. And I had a really big move while I was pregnant with my first one. So when I settled in Michigan, I found a therapist, and I saw her throughout my pregnancy. And after I had my first baby, it was a shock because you know that it's going to be hard. You're very well aware that it's going to be hard, but you just don't actually fully get it until you are deep in it.
There are times when I'm so frustrated that I have to take a step back and remember that they are just children. Small humans with big feelings. Small humans that shouldn't be held to adult standards. They're allowed to be loud and messy and make mistakes. I need to be the adult and help guide them through regulating their emotions. I was not given this grace as a child, so I'm learning to regulate all these feelings right alongside them. Here's some information from the Mayo Clinic on postpartum depression. Most new moms experience postpartum baby blues after childbirth, which commonly includes mood swings, crying spells, anxiety, and difficulty sleeping. Baby blues usually begin within the first 2 or 3 days after delivery and may last up to 2 weeks. But some new moms experience a more severe, long-lasting form of depression known as postpartum depression. Sometimes it's called peripartum depression because it can start during pregnancy and continue after childbirth. Rarely, an extreme mood disorder called postpartum psychosis may develop after childbirth. Postpartum depression is not a character flaw or a weakness. Sometimes it's simply a condition of giving birth. If you have postpartum depression, prompt treatment can help you manage your symptoms and help you bond with your baby. Symptoms of depression after childbirth vary and can range from mild to severe. Symptoms of baby blues, which only last a few days to a week or two after your baby is born, may include mood swings, anxiety, sadness, irritability, feeling overwhelmed, crying, reduced concentration, appetite problems, and trouble sleeping. Postpartum depression may be mistaken for baby blues at first, but the symptoms are more intense and last longer. These may eventually interfere with your ability to care for your baby and handle other daily tasks. Symptoms usually develop within the first few weeks after giving birth, but they may begin earlier during pregnancy or later, up to 5 years after birth. Postpartum depression symptoms may include depressed mood or severe mood swings, crying too much, difficulty bonding with your baby, withdrawing from friends and family, loss of appetite or eating much more than usual, inability to sleep or sleeping too much, overwhelming tiredness or loss of energy, less interest in pleasure and activities you used to enjoy, intense irritability and anger, fear that you're not a good mother, hopelessness, feelings of worthlessness, shame, guilt, or inadequacy, reduced ability to think clearly, concentrate, or make decisions, restlessness, severe anxiety and panic attacks, thoughts of harming yourself or your baby, and reoccurring thoughts of death or suicide. Untreated postpartum depression may last for many months or longer. My daughter watches me apply makeup and says, "Mommy, I want to be pretty just like you." I kneel to her and kiss her hands. How can I explain to her that she's a level of beauty I could never achieve? She will be everything I could not. From the moment she was a seed, I watered her even when the only thing I had left to give was my tears. I made sure the sun still shined even when the storm surrounded me. She is a fire that life can never stomp out because she will be greater than anything that tries. Jessica, did you have any kind of support system, or were you a part of any kind of support group while you were going through this?
I did have a little bit of support. I had my mother-in-law, but I just didn't want to utilize her that much. I felt that this was something I was supposed to do all on my own, that's what mothers were supposed to do, and so I did. I didn't ask help from my husband, and, of course he would, but he didn't really see the gravity of the situation going on because I didn't really talk about it. I just thought, oh, well, this is hard. I'm tired. That's probably, why I'm sad. When he gets older, this will get easier. And, he did get older and it just didn't get easier. I was starting to experience things that were kind of scary. I was starting to, see situations that just weren't really happening. And my anxiety was going through the roof. And I knew that once I started seeing things that weren't happening, obviously, then there's something very wrong going on. And so I talked to my therapist about it, and she explained to me about postpartum psychosis. And it wasn't really just postpartum depression. There was a lot more going on, and I needed to possibly be hospitalized for it.
With postpartum psychosis, a rare condition that usually develops within the first week after delivery, the symptoms are severe. Symptoms may include feeling confused and lost, having obsessive thoughts about your baby, hallucinating, and having delusions, having sleep problems, sleeping too much, or feeling upset, feeling paranoid, or making attempts to harm yourself or your baby. Postpartum psychosis may lead to life-threatening thoughts or behaviors and require immediate treatment. Jessica, can you talk a bit about what happened with your postpartum psychosis?
I went to a place, and I was there for a little over a week, and it was a scary experience. It was the first time leaving my baby. He was about to be a year old. My mother-in-law watched him while my husband was at work, but I was still worried about him. It was very hard to be without him. And then, of course, came the world of all the different medications that they would put me on throughout the next couple years, and just dealing with all the side effects of that. But it really wasn't until I found a book written by Brooke Shields. It was a bit older at the time, and it was called Down Came the Rain. And just the way that she explained everything, how she was feeling after she had given birth, I really connected to that. And for the first time, I thought, you know what, I'm not alone. And there's just this sense of peace that comes over you, that someone else out there shares your pain. And then you stop feeling so alone, and then you look at her and she's successful and she's, happy and thriving. And you think, if she can get better, then so can I. This definitely can't last forever.
Here are some quick postpartum depression facts and statistics. Approximately 1 in 10 women will experience postpartum depression after giving birth, with some studies reporting 1 in 7 women. Postpartum depression generally lasts 3 to 6 months. However, this varies based on several factors. It is estimated that nearly 50% of mothers with postpartum depression are not diagnosed by a health professional. 80% of women with postpartum depression will achieve a full recovery. Another important fact to consider about postpartum depression is that it can affect people from all races, ethnicities, cultures, and educational or economic backgrounds. Between 1 and 2 women out of every 1,000 will develop postpartum psychosis. Women who have a history of bipolar disorder are 40% more likely to develop postpartum psychosis. Tragically, 10% of postpartum psychosis cases result in suicide or death of the infant. Over 60% of women who took their own life during the postpartum period had not seen a mental health care provider within the month leading up to their death. Over the past decade, suicide attempts during and after pregnancy have nearly tripled. He is the bar that she will set all other men against. I watch it happen before my very eyes, the day my husband realized this. I see it in every Valentine's Day that he brings her flowers, and in the way she climbs up beside him and wrenches along some new project he has started. I see it in the way his voice has gotten softer and the way he has changed for her. And there's no bitterness in my mouth. One of the greatest things I have given her is a man who will not be her first heartbreak. There are some important factors of postpartum depression, important environmental risk factors. While postpartum depression can affect people of all backgrounds, people in poverty or who have poor access to education and healthcare may run a higher risk. Data suggests that 25% of people with a lower income level and lack to quality healthcare and education will develop postpartum depression. One study found that new moms of low socioeconomic status were 11 times more likely to develop postpartum depression symptoms than women of higher socioeconomic status. African American and Hispanic mothers reported the onset of symptoms within 2 weeks of delivery, unlike white mothers, who reported the onset of symptoms later. If you're feeling depressed after your baby's birth, you may be reluctant or embarrassed to admit it. But if you experience any symptoms of postpartum baby blues or postpartum depression, call your primary health care provider or your obstetrician or gynecologist and schedule an appointment. If you have symptoms that suggest you may have postpartum psychosis, get help immediately. It's important to call your provider as soon as possible if the symptoms of depression have any of these features. They don't fade after 2 weeks. They're getting worse. They make it hard for you to care for your baby, or make it hard for you to complete everyday tasks. They include thoughts of harming yourself or your baby. Seek help from your partner or loved ones in taking care of your baby. Call 911 or your local emergency assistance number to get help. Contact the suicide hotline. In the U.S., you can call or text 988 to reach the 988 Suicide and Crisis line, available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What did my parents teach me about love? That it hurts. It rips the skin completely off my bones. That I give and I give and I give until there's nothing left, and they still ask for more. At the end of the day, I am left completely empty, and I cry until I fall asleep. What did my children teach me about love? That it feels safe. I can be myself and not be criticized, and that I can give and give and give, and there are tiny faces who look up at me and say, "Mama, you're the best." That at the end of the day, I am so incredibly full that if I cry, the tears don't drain me, but rather, they water my soul.
And this was almost 14 years ago. And I think that mental health has come a long way in this country, but it still has a long way to go. I know in other countries, they have a lot of maternal health programs where they come out, to check up on the mother for weeks after the birth. They come and do laundry and take care of the mother and bring her food. And I know that there are some wonderful people out here that do that, the birth doulas and everything. And I think that that should be so much more accessible in this country because it is such a tough transition. Like I said before, you don't actually know until you're deep in it just how hard that it's going to be and how isolating you feel with a newborn. And I think as mothers, it takes a little bit to find the balance, the place between who you were before you gave birth, who you are now, and who you are trying to become. And having a support system is really important if you want to achieve that, because it's not only for your health, but it's for the health of your family. You hear stories in the news of horrible things that happen to mothers while they have postpartum depression. And that's why I think that it needs to be taken a lot more seriously, because your hormones, they absolutely plummet after giving birth. They are just all over the place. There's so much that you can't control biologically. And that's why having a support system is just so huge.
Jessica's right. Having a support system is huge, but it could be the difference between a life or death for you and your baby. Jessica, do you have any advice or any words to share with the people who are listening?
My advice would be to utilize what resources you have. And I know that mental health is so expensive in this country, but reach out to a friend, because this is hard. This will be the hardest yet most beautiful journey you will ever be on. And you are worth getting that help. and you are definitely not alone.
To all the mothers who are breaking all the cycles, does cutting their sandwiches into little shapes heal you too? Does it make your heart explode to know you are the only one they want when they cry? Do you feel a sense of accomplishment when they admit on their own that they lied and they're sorry? To all the mothers who are breaking all the cycles, you are amazing. I just want to give a big thank you to Jessica Jocelyn for joining me today. She shares important information that I feel is valuable to anybody listening, especially the fact that you're not alone. If you're suffering from postpartum depression, or you think you could have postpartum psychosis, you can call 1-833-TLC-MAMA. 1-833-852-6262 for 24/7 free confidential support for pregnant and new moms. If you are in a mental health crisis or have a suicidal crisis, call or text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 for free and confidential support, or please call 911. Childbirth is beautiful. It's messy. It's intense. It's a huge relief. Overall, it's just a beautiful process. What it shouldn't be is traumatic. But the National Institute of Health says traumatic childbirth is an international public health problem, with up to 45% of new mothers who reported experiencing birth trauma. For today, I want to talk about traumatic birth stories, and I don't have to go far to discuss the topic. I'm 33 years old and I've given birth to 3 children. The first child I had, I was pregnant at 18 and gave birth a month after my 19th birthday. Then when I got married to my husband Josh, he and I had 2 children together. Trixie is 4 and Ursula is 6. So I feel like I have some experience with childbirth. Though the birth of the first child I had, Lizzie, went just fine. I had no problems with her birth whatsoever. However, birthing my 2 children, Trixie and Ursula, was a different story. My whole pregnancy with Ursula was pretty traumatic, to be honest. From the very beginning, from about 7 weeks on, it was just trauma. And even after she was born, we weren't really in the clear yet. Josh and I got pregnant pretty quickly after we got married, as we wanted to have kids basically right away. So when we found out we were pregnant with Ursula and we went in, they confirmed the pregnancy, and I started going every week at the beginning, just for them to check my pregnancy hormones and make sure everything was okay. I went in at about 7 weeks, and they told us that we had lost the baby. They told us that our numbers weren't looking good and that there was no movement with the baby, and there were no signs of life with the baby. I remember this doctor's name and probably will for the rest of my life. She pulled us in her office and said, "You've lost the baby. I suggest you get a D&C today and take care of this today." So because my pregnancy wasn't viable, she wanted me to have an abortion. She was telling me that I was very clearly upset because this is the first child I get to keep. It's the first pregnancy for my husband and I, and we're trying to start our family, so we're really excited. We're just starting out our family. And she asks me, because I'm so upset, I assume, this doctor asks, "Are you going to go home and kill yourself?" And I was very surprised, very shocked. I said, "No, why would you say that? Who says that?" She says, "Well, I had a patient about a month and a half ago who found out they had lost their baby, and she went home and killed herself." It's pretty heavy. We just found out we lost our baby. I told her I didn't want to have a D&C, that I wanted to pass the baby naturally, so we went home. And for a week, we grieved. We lost our baby for a week. I think Josh probably took it a lot harder than I did. It was very sweet to see him, how he was responding to the news. It was very touching to us both, obviously. We looked into funeral arrangements and burials and all sorts of things to do after we lost the baby. I looked into what it meant to pass a baby naturally, and I waited for that for like a week, So a week goes by, and I take one of my friends with me to the appointment because at this point, I know they're just going to tell me where at in the process of passing the baby I'm at. So they go in and look and say, your baby has a heartbeat. Your baby has a heartbeat. Why would they tell you it's a non-viable pregnancy? And I was pretty floored. I went home. I went to talk to my husband. I can't remember exactly how the conversation went, but I know that I was very upset. I was crying. I was trying to figure out what to tell my husband because I couldn't just jump out and say, our baby is alive. But eventually, we talked about it and it was figured out. It was just really hard for me to get the words out at that time. So we were back on track with our pregnancy. After hearing the news that we lost our pregnancy, we were back on track. So we continued with our pregnancy. Everything seemed to be fine. And then we hit about 20 weeks. So we get an ultrasound. And they tell us there's something wrong with the placement of my placenta. And there's something wrong with the umbilical cord. They're not giving me a name of what this is. They're not giving me a name for it. They're just telling me that there's something wrong. Something is not how it's supposed to be. And they say, don't worry, the baby's safe right now. But if you were to give birth, your baby would probably die. They said they needed more ultrasounds to kind of see the extremes of it. And they wanted me to get a next level tier ultrasound in 2 weeks. So I'm back distressing for a couple weeks about the news that we just got about our baby. All this time, I'm just feeling completely helpless. I can't, there's nothing I can do to keep my baby safe, even though my baby's growing inside of me. I can't put my hands in, reach in there and fix everything. So I'm feeling pretty miserable. And it's hard. I'm having a hard time with this pregnancy. Some other things are happening during my pregnancy. I'm just in a lot of pain. My body's not responding well to being pregnant. I'm having to wear 2 braces on my wrists. I have to get a back brace for my back because I have this huge belly and scoliosis, and I'm having a hard time carrying the extra weights. I have extra amniotic fluid, but not enough for polyhydramnios. But they're keeping an eye on that. There's just a lot of things that are happening in this pregnancy, typical pregnancy pains that I'm experiencing while going through this bad news. So 2 weeks pass by and we go and get the next tier level ultrasound, tier 2 level ultrasound. And once again, we were told that everything is fine. And they questioned why would they tell us something was wrong when everything looks so fine. So, as frustrated as we are and as miserable as I am, once again, we're back on track with my pregnancy. Everything seems to be going fine now, I hit 40 weeks and then I go past it some, and I'm finally ready to have the baby. I'm in the birthing room. I'm having a hard time just giving birth, to be honest. I'm scared. I'm scared to give birth. I'm terrified to have a baby. So I'm having a bit of a hard time, and I go into distress. So they put a mask on me and give me air, and then the baby goes into distress. And then I know it's time. It's time for me to put aside my feelings and my fears, and it's time to really try and give birth. They tell me that I have something called choreo. Choreo is a bacterial infection of the mother's placenta and the amniotic fluid that surrounds the baby. It's diagnosed before or shortly after delivery. Mine was diagnosed during delivery. So I'm no expert on choreo. I'm in the birthing room, and it's not like I have time to whip out my phone and read up on it, you know? I wasn't being told too much about it either. They just told me that my baby was in danger and that they were going to have to take my baby to make sure that she was okay. So we're almost all ready to go with the baby into the nursery, and they go to draw some blood, and my doctor ends up sticking herself with one of my needles. So I have to stay back and make sure I don't have any sexually transmitted diseases that I just gave to this doctor. So my husband and my newborn child leave and go to the nursery without me. They also find out while I'm giving birth that I had MRSA. Not that I actively had it, but that I had it over a decade ago when I was a teenager, when there was an outbreak in the town that I lived in at the grocery store I worked at. This was apparently really big news to them, and they responded by placing us under quarantine, at least me and the baby. They showed Josh and I to our room, and they tell us to sit tight, and we're just going to have to wait while they run tests and make sure that Ursula's okay. But they're telling us that we need to prepare ourselves for the worst. So we do. We just sit on the bed and hold each other and cry. And that's all we know what to do. We just cry for our baby. And I remember about 3 hours passed, and they finally brought her into us and told us that everything was fine, that we were still under quarantine, but they ran tests, and that Ursula was going to be okay. We were in the hospital for 5 days, just so they could keep an eye on her, because I think she ran a fever or something. There was something that was keeping us there besides the quarantine. But basically, we got to leave as soon as they lifted that quarantine up. And that's my birthing story with Ursula. It was terrifying. I know they say that pregnancy is one of the best times in a person's life. You know, you're growing another life inside of you. And it's true. It's a beautiful thing. But it also was the most stressful, most terrifying part of my life. I was unable to help my child that was so close to me and just unreachable. I had zero control over anything. Even when I was doing everything right, I was doing everything right, things were still going wrong, and doctors were still making mistakes. And it was hard to enjoy my pregnancy when we were so stressed the whole time. We were just so stressed out the whole time, and things didn't get much easier with Trixie. It was pretty early in our pregnancy when they told us that they thought we lost Trixie. They didn't know if the pregnancy was viable again. But this time, we just kind of took it for what it was. And, you know, from our experience with Ursula, that they could just be wrong. So we just took it for what it was. And we said, let's see what's going on next week. And of course, again, it was a viable pregnancy. We did learn, though, that I had a condition called polyhydramnios, which happens when there's too much amniotic fluid around the baby during pregnancy. This can cause issues in regards to how the baby develops. It can be caused by problems with the baby's swallowing or heart rate or pre-existing diabetes. Some problems that polyhydramnios can cause are preterm birth, preterm rupture of the membranes, which is called PROM, which they break after 37 weeks of pregnancy before labor starts, placenta abruption, stillbirth, postpartum hemorrhage, uterine atony, bleeding after delivery, prolapse umbilical cord, and birth defects. Just so much stuff, so many issues that we found out pretty early that's what I had. I had polyhydramnios. So I went from a regular pregnancy to a high-risk pregnancy with Trixie, where I was having to sit in a chair and get monitored every week for about 2 hours. They were monitoring me every week. I would just go to the hospital, sit in this chair, they'd hook me up to a bunch of stuff, and they would monitor me for 2 hours. You know, they would just monitor the poly for 2 hours and see how everything was going with the baby. So things were pretty stressful. It didn't get any better when we went to have Trixie. Ursula had roseola at the same time I went into labor. So as Josh was checking into the emergency room with Ursula, who had roseola, I was in labor being pushed by a stranger up to labor and delivery. Thankfully, I did have a friend there who was really wonderful, who helped me through the birth with Trixie. You know, she was by my side. She helped me push. She was just really amazing, a really great support system, like having a sister there, you know. So I appreciated Rachel for being there for me. It was a lot. I was so nervous from the birth with Ursula that I said, you know, I'm not wasting any time birthing Trixie. I'm pushing this baby out as soon as possible because I was scared I was going to go and have the same complications with Trixie as well. I didn't know if I had choreo again, and I wanted her to be out of that amniotic fluid as soon as possible. So I birthed Bellatrix in 8 minutes. And I'll be honest, that's like a point of pride for me as a mom. I birthed her in 8 minutes. And I went to do skin to skin pretty immediately. And I went to feed her pretty much immediately so we could start bonding. But she was purple. She was purple and she couldn't breathe. And they took her away from me very quickly. And we're just huddled in the corner whispering over her. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was happening. Nobody was telling me anything. They just took her. They said she had something called transient tachypnea. Transient tachypnea is when newborns have very fast or labored breathing in the first few hours of life. Because of this, transient means it doesn't last very long, usually less than 24 hours. Tachypnea means to breathe quickly. So she was breathing, she had labored breathing. She was just having a hard time breathing in general. So they hooked her up to a bunch of machines and gave her oxygen. And she just was failing her breathing tests left and right. I didn't have Josh with me at the time because he was in the emergency room with Ursula, sending me pictures of, you know, Ursula in the emergency room, and I was sending him pictures of, you know, our new baby. And even after Ursula was discharged from the emergency room, Josh couldn't be around us because he had been around Ursula, who was contagious, and they were worried about Trixie being exposed to roseola when she was already having these issues, and she was just this newborn baby. It was really hard with Trixie. It was really hard with Trixie because she was so tiny. She was a 7-pound baby. So she was a healthy sized baby, but compared to Ursula, she was tiny. It was so hard. It was so hard watching this itty bitty little baby having a hard time breathing. She had to sit in the NICU without me, and sometimes I could go in there and sit with her. So when it was time for her breathing test, we couldn't leave. She couldn't leave the NICU without passing her breathing test. So when it was time for her next breathing test, I went in with her and I laid her on my bare chest and I read her the Jungle Book, and she passed her breathing test as I was reading to her. Now, there was a time when she was in the NICU and she stopped breathing, but thankfully she was on oxygen. She ended up growing very strong in such a short period of time that she was able to breathe fine. We were able to take her home from the hospital in 3 days, and everything seemed to be fine with Trixie. She kind of had a rough start. The birth of both of my children were so traumatic to me. Just the experience of pregnancy and being in the hospital, going through what I went through with the doctors, whether it be they tell us we lost the baby, or they gave us bad news that turns out not to be true, or they poked themselves on my sharp, or what have you. I feel like I developed some PTSD, some post-traumatic stress surrounding hospitals, and I really didn't like hospitals before, but now I definitely don't like hospitals. I feel like I'm less trusting of medical professionals. I feel like I'm just less, like I have less faith in hospitals and doctors in general. I just like to think back. I just like to think back on the Jess I used to be when I thought a birthing plan was actually a real thing and could possibly happen, and where I was cute enough to print one and bring it to the hospital with me, and then everything fell apart. And then with Trixie, I realized that a birthing plan is a fantasy. It's a fantasy. Some people are lucky enough to experience it, while most of us don't. I think if there's one thing my 33-year-old self could tell my 26-year-old self, or an expecting mother, it would be this. Nothing is going to go the way you planned. The only thing you can truly hope for in the end is a healthy child, because everything else doesn't matter. And moms, pregnancy is not easy. Childbirth is not easy. Please remember that there is a maternal mental health hotline, which is confidential and free for expecting and new moms. You can reach them at 1-833-9-HELP4MOMS or 1-833-943-5746. I know you by heart. I've memorized every freckle, every speck of gold in your eyes. In a room full of people, I'd still be able to pick out your cry. And if my sight was ever taken, I'd know your face with my hands. Well, that's it for me today. Thank you for joining me for what I feel like is a very important episode to discuss traumatic births, postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and poetry. I hope you take care of yourselves and take care of each other. I love you.